Good morning. My name is Rhonda Devine, and I'm with the Office of Finance and Operations, Division of District Support, Branch Manager for the Student Tracking Data Branch. And joining me today is Chuck Truesdell from the Office of the Commissioner, Director of Government Relations, who will discuss the 2021 session legislative updates. Our director, Che Ritter, should be joining us soon, and we also have our Associate Director, Jesse Carlton, and members of the Division of District Support, Josh Whitlow and Laura Lohman, who will be helping with questions and producing this meeting today. Angie McDonald will also be joining us later to help with any questions on Healthy at School. The meeting is broken down into two sections. Mr. Truesdell will begin with legislative updates, and there will be time after his presentation to take questions. The chat is available, but please make sure that you put your name in the chat so we know who's asking the questions so that we can reach out to you after the meeting and help with anything that you need. So the second half of this meeting will be just some general housekeeping information, and I'll also have time for questions at the end as well. We had a Google Docs, and there are several questions on that, so we appreciate your questions, and we'll give you the answers to those towards the end of the meeting. We're also going to record the session, and we'll send out the link, and also just to let you know where it's located on our website. So now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Truesdell. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, Rhonda. Good to be here. This is my first time speaking to all of the DPPs. So for those of you who don't know me, I am new in this role. I started in January, back when the legislative session started. So this is my first recap for you. I'm going to essentially use a lot of the same slides that I've used for the State Board of Education. And so I'll go over just some of the highlights of bills that passed this legislative session. I won't obviously be going over any bills that did not pass. And then we'll open it up for some Q&A, and you can ask about these bills or any others, any other questions you may have. So if we can go to the next slide. So Senate bill, or sorry, that should be House Bill 208, my apologies, is something that most of you should already be familiar with because this was an emergency bill and took effect in late March. Essentially, it allowed school districts, it gave sort of legislative stamp of approval to continue doing what we had been doing all year long through emergency regulations. A few differences that I want to cover here that most of you should be aware about right now because we've already done some webinars in the past on this. Number one, everybody should be on at least a hybrid schedule, which means you are at least giving every student 2 days access to a classroom through the rest of the school year each week. That doesn't mean that every student has to attend. Obviously, districts can and most have allowed students who on their own volition to continue virtual learning or non-traditional instruction. Now, districts can have up to 5 more NTI days the rest of the school year. For those of you who are on a hybrid schedule, those 2 or 3 days a week where you're not in the classroom, those do not count towards your 5. And so if you have any questions, I would welcome those. You're also allowed for the rest of this school year to use 30 minutes per day, and think of that as sort of essentially 5 minutes per 6 class periods a day to use your instructional time for COVID-related activities. We're talking hand washing, sanitization, explaining everything to the kids about what they need to be doing, that sort of thing. And then SEEK funding, and we'll get into this a little bit later when we talk about full day kindergarten funding, but for your SEEK funding next year, it will be based on the numbers that you selected last spring to use for the current school year. So essentially that baseline ADA that you chose originally will be your continuing baseline, but you will be collecting the normal data that we have been collecting this year. You will continue to collect that next year. And you will also be taking attendance as normal next year. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail momentarily. But I think that's going to be one of the things that a lot of DPPs have questions about is how your SEEK funding is going to work and how you have to count attendance. We will not be doing participation next year. We will be going back to that attendance model. So 2 points that I want to make is that if you plan on having an NTI plan next year, number one, we are going back to the old pre-COVID NTI plan, which is you can get up to 10 days a year. You have to submit your plan to KDE. The deadline for submitting that plan to KDE is actually May 1st. So if you have not done it, you better be scrambling. And again, if you don't plan on using NTI next year at all, then that's fine. You don't have to. And you don't have to submit anything if that's the case. The second thing on the SEEK funding and the attendance is that you should all be aware that KDE has announced that you can apply for a waiver if you are going to do a virtual academy or something of that sort. Whereas right now, to get SEEK funding for those virtual students in a normal non-COVID year, you would have to essentially put them in a performance-based program, and then you get funding at the end of the year based on student success. If they don't pass the classes, you don't get any funding. And KDE is currently accepting waivers that would allow you to have virtual academies where you would take attendance essentially twice daily. So you'd do the half day, full day SEEK funding as normal. And so if you have questions about that, number one, the deadline for applying is April 30th, and that's tomorrow. And so if you have any questions about that, I would welcome those. Next slide, please. House Bill 382. This passed in the waning days of the legislative session, and that includes $140 million to SEEK to fund full day kindergarten. Two things that we've gotten a lot of questions on. Number one is that this does not require school districts to offer full day kindergarten. It simply says that you do get funded, at least for next year. This is a one-year bill, one-year funding. So if you did, and of course, again, going back to House Bill 208, we are using old data for next school year because we have participation data for this year. We don't have attendance data. So we will be using that 1819 or 1920 data. And what we'll be doing is rolling your full day kindergarten numbers into that to adjust for your full SEEK funding next year. If you only have half day program or some students are only attending on a half day basis, you will get half day funding for those students. If those students are full day students, you will be getting full day for those students. This is not a mandate. You do not have to offer full day kindergarten. That is a choice that you can make on your own. I will tell you now that KDE will be advocating to make this permanent and to change the statutes to allow for full day funding of kindergarten. Again, not to mandate it, but if districts offer full day kindergarten, we will be advocating to get full funding for that going forward. Again, House Bill 382 only included funding for next school year. It does not go out any further than that. Next slide, please. House Bill 405 has a number of other funding provisions. Number one, actually, I'll start at the bottom on this. SFCC was given $10 million to assist local school districts who suffered from recent flooding. There are a couple of caveats there. Number one, that will be offset by any FEMA funding that you get. And I know a lot of districts have had issues with FEMA in the past year or so. And I know that there is somewhat of a delay in FEMA announcing who's eligible and what the funding plan will be for that. But just know that if you get a part of this money, it will be, you'll have to reimburse them for any FEMA funding that you get on that front, and also any insurance proceeds. So this is actually eligible for any facility, so including athletic facilities, outbuildings, things of that nature. It's not the normal SFCC funding that a lot of time can only be used on, your normal school buildings. Going back up to the top, House Bill 405, along with another bill, House Bill 563, established a school funding task force that will be meeting this summer, we believe in June. The members of that task force have not been appointed yet, but there will be 6 legislators, 3 superintendents, and 3 local school board members, along with Dr. Glass, the commissioner, and or his designee. One of those superintendents must come from an independent school district, and the superintendents will be appointed by KASS, and the local school board members will be appointed by KSBA. That task force is going to look at not just SEEK funding, but also local revenues and what other options there may need to be, or whether those the caps on those tax rates are appropriate, all of that from soup to nuts. They'll be looking at facilities funding. They will be looking at career and technical education funding. Essentially everything it takes to fund a local school district outside of federal funding, because we obviously have no control over that. All of that will be on the table. And this is a long overdue task force. I know a lot of task forces in the past I've seen have not accomplished much. There's been a lot of talk and very little action, but KDE is going to do its part to make sure that we actually have an action plan and some legislation that can result from this next school year, next legislative session. KDE is also mandated to report to LRC and the task force with essentially how to allow funds to follow a student from a district where they live to the district where they're going to attend school. And I'll get into that in just a little bit in another bill, which gets into that in a little more depth. Next slide, please. And this is that bill, House Bill 563. So beginning not this coming school year, but in the 22-23 school year, districts will be allowed to essentially accept any and all non-resident students without a contract. Right now, in order to get SEEK funding for a student that doesn't live in your school district, you have to have a non-resident contract or a reciprocal agreement with the district where they reside. That will no longer be the case under House Bill 563. So essentially you have 1 year to sort of start planning and figuring out what your non-resident pupil policy will look like. This is a very vague piece of language, and I'll be frank, you're going to have a lot of questions on this and we will have very few answers at this point. We intend to work with the Legislative Research Commission and the General Assembly, and hopefully the School Funding Task Force as well, to look at how to refine and more narrowly define what they intend with this. I will say that right now your reciprocal agreements do not have to be filed with the Department of Education. However, these non-resident pupil policies will have to be filed with KDE. And again, this just will dictate state funding. So the SEEK funding will follow that student, essentially, regardless of whether there's a contract or not, because contracts will be out the window. Those students will be counted in their SEEK funding. So you'll count them in your ADA, you'll count them in all of your add-ons. They will be part of that denominator when we calculate your property assessment on a per pupil basis that helps determine Tier 1 and helps determine your nickel funding. And so that is that on that. I will say 563 has another provision, and so we'll go to the next slide on that. There is also, this is maybe the most controversial bill that passed the legislature this session, and that creates a tax credit up to $1 million per taxpayer, $25 million on a statewide basis for contributions to an account granting organization that can then distribute those funds to what they define as low income students, but on a statewide basis, they may not be your lowest income students necessarily. And there's a lot of different expenses that can be paid for out of these education opportunity accounts, but we expect that the largest share of that will go toward private school tuition in the counties with the 8 largest counties in the state population wise. I will say if you have questions about this, you can direct those to the Department of Revenue because KDE was completely left out of this portion of the bill. Everything having to do with this will run through the Department of Revenue because it's mostly a tax provision. We will not handle any of the money. We will not be handling any of the qualifications for parents or students or families, any of that. That is all outside the scope of KDE. Furthermore, I would expect there to be a lawsuit in the coming months or so, and there is no severability clause in this bill. So if this provision is found unconstitutional, it would take away the whole bill, including the public school option portion. And so that is something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 8 is another bill that I would suggest, if you have any questions. KDE really doesn't have a role in this, but it does touch on education. I would suggest, if you have questions about this, to contact your local health department. So this essentially says, in the case of an epidemic, which would be a more locally focused cousin of a pandemic, which is worldwide, generally speaking, the current law said that the state can require vaccinations or immunizations in the case of an epidemic. And Senate Bill 8 says they can't do that if the child, the guardian, and a emancipated minor object on religious grounds or conscientiously held beliefs. There have been immunization exemptions, as you well know, before based on religious beliefs, but now it's simply your conscientiously held personal beliefs. And then, of course, as always, your healthcare provider could also provide a written opinion that the immunization would be bad for the student's health. So what this means is you could end up with more students coming in who simply are not vaccinated, and this could end up affecting not just COVID vaccines, because obviously students at that age are not eligible for COVID vaccines yet, but it would also affect your other vaccinations that are usually required. So KDE did register a significant concern on this, but obviously the bill passed nonetheless. So that's something to be aware of, particularly when you have your kindergartners or new students transferring into your district and you require that immunization record. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 101. For those of you who have career and tech education students who attend a state-operated ATC, particularly if your district owns the facility that houses that ATC, your district could, if you choose to, could assume control, local control and management of that career tech center. You have to notify a KDE by December 31st. If you would like to do that for the upcoming school year, you need to do that as soon as possible, just for logistical reasons. If you have an ATC in your district and it serves multiple districts, for instance, and my knowledge of career tech education is not what it should be, so I'll use one that I know does not have an ATC. If you are in Lewis County, which has a layback, but if you had an ATC and you were also serving, say, Fleming and Mason counties, you own the facility. Mason and Fleming, you would have to have an agreement with them to continue to provide those services, because the goal is to make sure that every student still has access to career and technical education. The biggest hurdle is going to be coming to that memorandum agreement with your what we call our feeder districts. A number of you have already indicated interest in taking over your ATC and bring that under local control. The question is, why would you not want the local control? The simple answer is the funding. The state pays for the teachers and the operational funding for ATCs, and that is significantly more than what the state sends to locally operated centers. So the way this would work is, if you take over your ATC, you get 100% of what you're getting now in the first year. And then the second year and thereafter, you get 75% of that current amount. So it's not 75% of 75% of 75% as the years go on. It is a flat 75%. And then good news for those of you who have locally operated centers that aren't getting funding right now because you were not grandfathered in earlier, that 25% that's going to spill over will go to those laybacks that aren't getting funding right now. So as more and more ATCs convert to local control, that pool will grow larger and be distributed among those schools. And just a question for the personnel. If you have a certified employee, so essentially your teachers and administrative staff, they would continue to enjoy the merit protection, so they're going to get tenure in your school district, just like they have merit protections as state employees right now. Classified employees who have merit status and have come off probation essentially in the state system would be protected for at least 5 years. So they wouldn't have tenure, but you could not just dismiss them for any reason for the next 5 years. Next slide, please. Senate Bill 128. This is a bill that a lot of questions have been coming in on. And I would remind you that the deadline for students to indicate their interest is May 1st, so end of this week. So the supplemental school year program, and KDE has issued guidance on this. If you go to KDE's website under the district school and district support page, there is a link there to KDE's guidance and an FAQ. So this allows students to essentially do this past year over, including high school seniors who are graduating. For this next year only, graduated seniors can come back and they can supplement their education. They can take the same courses they took last time. They can take supplementary courses that will help improve and help their college readiness before they move on. Again, students and their families have until May 1st to indicate their interest. Once you have all of that information, districts can have until June 1st to decide whether they want to take part. Now, here's the thing. If your district wants to take part, you have to take part. You have to use this for every student who is requested. You can't pick and choose. If you decide not to take part, then you just do not have a supplemental school year program, but you still have all of the normal statutory abilities and regulatory abilities you have to retain students. This doesn't mean that you have to pass a student who is failing their classes. If they choose to use the SSYP program and the district chooses not to, you can still retain those students just like you've always been able to. For those districts that choose to take part in the SSYP, you have to submit your plan to KDE. And then you also, if there are any administrative regulations that you need waived to implement this, you have to have those waiver requests to the Board of Education by June 16th, and we will have a special meeting if necessary to approve or deny any of those waivers. One of the biggest questions that keeps coming up is with athletic eligibility. So number one, I would refer you to any really in-depth questions to the KHSAA, Julian Tackett, but high school students who take part will have a 5th year of athletic eligibility. So if you are a freshman this year, or a sophomore or a junior or a senior, you could have a 5th year of eligibility. If you're in 8th grade, your new school year doesn't, your athletic eligibility doesn't start until you start your freshman year. But that 5th year does not override the fact that there's still the age limit of 19. So if your student turns 19 before August 1st, they are still ineligible for that athletic eligibility. I would also note that for students who take part in this program, we have this graduated seniors program next year, but it is a 1-year program. So if you are a sophomore and you take part in this program, but because of the courses you take, you actually have enough credits to graduate in 4 years, and you don't need that 5th year. Those students will not have a 5th year. This 5th year for graduated seniors is for next school year only, and then it's over. And then very directly for DPPs, those graduated seniors have to complete each semester or they do not generate SEEK funding. So if, for instance, if you have a football player or a band member or whatever, and they're only there because they missed out on an extracurricular experience they really wanted to try, and they go through, and once that season is over, you know, they participate in the playoffs or the state finals or whatever, and then November 15th, they drop out because they've met the graduation requirements, they're done. You will not get any SEEK funding for that student. They will not be included in your ADA. They will be removed. So that is something to keep in mind. When students are signing up for this program, you may want to make assurances that they intend to stay the entire time. Again, if you take part in this program, you cannot deny any students who have requested. So you could get burned on this. That's just something you need to keep in mind and take into account as you go forward on this. Next slide, please. And that is it for the legislative highlights. But again, I am happy to take any questions that you may have about these bills or any others.
All right, Chuck, we do have a few questions for you.
All right.
Okay, I want to say first, get some feedback. We do have a couple of NTI questions, so if you guys will just hold on, Wendy Newton's going to be joining us, so we'll catch those here in a minute. So don't think I'm skipping your question. First question for you, Chuck, is will the 30 minutes of instructional time for activities such as hand washing, sanitization, etc., carry over into next school year 21-22?
No, that will not. That is one of those provisions that is only for for this current school year. So you will not be able to do that going forward.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Next question. Under House Bill 563, if non-resident contracts are out the window for the 22-23 school year, must districts take out of county students?
So this is a two-sided proposition. Districts do not have to accept out-of-district students. You can have a non-resident pupil policy that just says, no, we're not taking any. However, if another district does have a policy where they're taking out-of-district students, you cannot stop them from taking your students. And that is really where a lot of the controversy lies. The other part of this non-resident pupil policy, again, it was a very vague language, but the one thing it did say was that you cannot discriminate among these non-resident students. Not exactly sure what that means at this point. Opinions may vary, and I'm not an attorney, so take that for what it's worth. But that is something to keep in mind. We do seem to think that what it means is, among other things, if you have a non-resident policy, you say we will take students from other districts, you can't say we're going to take them from this district but not that district, or we will only take students who meet certain qualifications. You will not be able to do anything of that nature. I hope that answers the question, but you do not have to accept out-of-district students if you don't want to. Okay. Your policy can simply be, nope, we're not doing it.
All right, someone has asked if you could please repeat the last comment on senior program.
Sure. I think my last comment was on the graduated seniors. So again, if you are a senior this year, oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'll repeat both of those because I'm not sure which one I said, and both bear repeating. The graduated senior program, so if you have a G code in Infinite Campus, you can come back next year for the 21-22 school year. However, high school students who end up graduating in 4 years and want that 5th year because they're taking part in this program, once you meet the graduation requirements, you are done. You have to, as one of my colleagues says, you have to vacate the premises after that school year. So the graduated senior program is only for this next school year. The other issue is for those graduated seniors. If they're taking part in this program and they come back next year, obviously there's nothing you can do to keep them on campus because they've graduated. They're beyond certain truancy provisions. Once they drop out, even because they've already graduated, you can't stop them from leaving. However, the bill is very clear that in order to get these students can be included in your seat count, in your ADA. However, they have to attend for the entire semester. And the point to that is this is an academic bill, or it's supposed to be an academic bill. This is not for athletics or extracurriculars only. So again, if a student enrolls in the supplemental program and they're there the first day of school and they're there through the entire fall, but let's say they're playing basketball, to use another example. They're there throughout the fall, and then at the end of basketball season, you lose in the region tournament, and the next day the student comes in and says, all right, I'm done. I've gotten everything that I wanted out of this year. You get the fall semester, you can include them in your fall semester ADA. You'll be able to count them half day, full day, whatever they attended. But in the spring, because they did not finish the spring semester, you will not be able to count their attendance for each of those spring semester days. Because it's going to be they have to finish the semester to be included in your ADA for all the days in that semester. And I think that is going to be something that Jessie and her staff are going to be working with you on in Infinite Campus to figure out, and we'll have more guidance coming out as we get closer to the school year on infinite campus issues.
Yes, and I was going to jump in on that and say,
Please
you know,
do,
we haven't exactly, totally hammered that out yet. And it may be kind of on a case by case basis, because there's lots of things in Infinite Campus you can't just wipe out. If there's a behavior or, schedules or whatnot, we're going to have to figure out if you have this situation, how we're going to get that out of the system.
Yeah.
Okay, this kind of goes hand in hand with that, I think, Chuck. It says, I thought ADA will be based on the 18-19. So how would we not get ADA funding for a fifth-year senior who decides not to finish the year?
Right. Again, so these are two separate issues. Your funding for next year is based on that previous ADA data, but the attendance that you're collecting for these students is going to be the basis for your 22-23 SEEK funding, because as you know, SEEK always lags a year. And so that you still have to take attendance next year, but it won't be counting, it won't be used in the SEEK funding until the 22-23 school year, if that makes sense for any of you.
Okay, regarding Senate Bill 128, if all graduation requirements are met, is it true or not true the grades on transcript cannot be changed for seniors?
So your transcript is, once you've graduated, that is locked. So you can't change your GPA. For instance, let's say you took Algebra 2 and you got a C, but you graduated. Or to use a better example, let's say you took English 4 and you got a C. You've graduated. Well, your graduated senior year, you're going to come back and take English 4 again because you think you could do better. You want to get a better handle on it before you go off to college. And this time you get an A. So your GPA is locked. That C is used in your final GPA on your transcript. That A will not count. Now, that can be included as supplementary information on your transcript. You can make a note of the student took these classes and got these grades, but that is not part of the GPA calculated as part of your graduation transcript.
Okay, I think we're getting comfortable now because the questions are rolling in, so get ready.
Good.
All right, could you repeat the comment about the supposed lawsuit around House Bill 563?
All I can say is that we've heard that there will be a lawsuit. There's been constant talk about a lawsuit. I don't know who will file it. It won't be me. But we do expect a lawsuit to be filed on that. So all I can say is, watch the news. Because if the court suspends that or, issues an injunction or, eventually it'll go to the Supreme Court, I have no doubt. And if they declare it unconstitutional, then that bill will not happen, all of it. So again, not an attorney, but I keep hearing people talk about that there will be a lawsuit filed at some point. I'm surprised one has not been filed already.
All right, next question is asking for some more clarification. Did you say that we as a district cannot put criteria in place for accepting out-of-district students? For example, can we consider an out-of-district student's grades, attendance, and discipline when considering an out-of-district application? Can we still consider available space for new students?
You can consider available space. Capacity is maybe the only thing in the bill that is specifically mentioned as a criterion. On the what issues and criteria can you use to consider out-of-district students, that is very unclear at this point. And that is one of the many things, as I said to lead off, you're going to have questions and we will not have answers yet. We are still working with the General Assembly. We are hopeful that there will be more legislation coming in the 22 session to clarify what they mean by discrimination and what districts can and cannot use. Okay. And I'm sorry, we just don't have better information at this time.
Did I hear correctly that when developing your non-resident policy for House Bill 563, your local policy is either an all or none, as local district cannot add requirements, an example, attendance or history, for non-resident students?
I wouldn't say it's all or none. I would say it's unclear at this point. The bill only says you cannot discriminate among students. And as we know, there is significant disagreement as to what constitutes discrimination. So again, stay tuned. We're trying to figure out and develop a better idea of what this will look like. I would almost certainly expect that the school funding task force that will be meeting over the summer and the next General Assembly session in 22 will sort of clarify some of these issues.
Okay, we've got a couple of virtual academy questions I'm going to skip over and come back to because there's some more legislation questions down here. Under House Bill 563, I think we just answered this. They're asking again, you have to take all non-residents or none. Can we deny students or send back if the student's behavior or attendance problem? I think you just covered that. I'm sorry. If a lawsuit is expected for House Bill 563, do we need to go ahead and have the board approve non-resident contracts and send those out for 22-23 school year?
So are you talking about, I'm assuming you're talking about reciprocal agreements
Yes.
for 22-23. So the one issue with the non-resident pupil policies that I've heard of, most of the lawsuit talk that I always hear on 563 concerns the educational opportunity accounts. But the one issue that I keep hearing about is impairment of contracts, because some districts do have multi-year contracts for their reciprocal agreements. My advice would be, number one, talk to your board attorney on what the best course of action would be. But number two, you might want to have something in place that, if 563 does not take effect, that you do have a reciprocal agreement, a non-resident contract with your other school districts for 22-23 in case that is thrown out. That is probably the best, the most prudent course of action, I would think.
Okay, we're back to supplemental school year questions. If a student retakes a grade and has not graduated, does the higher grade take the place of the lower grade? How will they receive credit for both courses? So they've given an example. 10th grader earns a C, supplementary year gets an A. Will there be a grade for graduation? Requirement to take a math course of the A or to take a, I'm guessing they're going to average it, to take the A and C for an elective course.
So you could, there's two separate questions there, really. Number one is, can you substitute the higher grade for the lower grade? And yes, you can, include that they got an A for their GPA. You can do that. However, you cannot get credit twice for that same course. So you only get credit for taking Algebra 2 once. And I will circle back on this because our Office of Teaching and Learning has a lot more detail on this. They are the experts on this portion of it. And so I will, before I talk any further, I will get back with them and we'll provide you with a written response on that.
Okay, and I think I read the second part of the question wrong. I think they're asking if they take it the second time, could that second time in the course be used for an elective course? So I think we'll probably have to follow up with them also on that, right, Chuck?
I think we do have an answer on that. I'm not quite sure what the answer is, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. Okay.
All right. I think that's all we have right now. We do have some NTI questions. Do you mind to hang on just a minute, Chuck? Do
Sure,
some NTI questions that Wendy can answer, and then we'll see if any more come in.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think Wendy Newton has joined us, so I'm going to go back up to the top and roll through some of these NTI questions. All right, Wendy, is there a separate NTI application? I was under the impression that it was now part of Phase 4 in our CEP and eProof.
That is correct. There is not a separate NTI application for the 21-22 school year. You will be completing that and making that request in eProof within your CDIP. And the name of the plan is the Continuation of Learning Plan, Phase 4.
Okay, going right along with that, if we were approved for NTI days previously, do we have to reapply?
Yes, everyone has to reapply for the 21-22 school year.
When will we know if we were approved or denied for NTI for 21-22?
Well, the applications are due May 1st, so they'll start going through those and making through the approval process at that point. I would say I can't speak for the people that have to do that work, but I'm gonna give them a month, so I would say June 1st, maybe sooner. I can't speak to them, I don't know for sure.
Okay, all right. We have some kind of general questions now about virtual next year, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw them out there so we don't get confused, and then we'll go to the next section with Rhonda. We currently do not plan to offer a virtual option for next year. We have applied for NTI days for next year, however. My question is, by not offering a virtual option, are we handicapping ourselves if COVID cases spike, or will every district only be allowed 10 NTI days, whether they offer virtual or not? Wendy, I think that's you now. That is just 10 NTI days, whether you're virtual or not next year, correct?
Sorry, I put myself back on mute. That is correct. We're going back to the 10-day, the traditional NTI.
Okay, and I will add in there, you know, just because you're virtual next year, and we'll get into this more in Rhonda's section, it's not going to be like this year if you have a virtual option. It's not kind of a hopping back and forth from virtual to in-person. It's one path or the other next year. Let's see. If we have a virtual academy, period attendance is to be taken for high school and middle school students, correct? And that is correct. If a high school student is scheduled for math during second period and they are not working on math, then they are absent, and that's correct. They have to be actively working during the traditional school day, even though they are virtual. That's going to get a little bit more into the synchronous and asynchronous learning. I think if somebody else is on the call here that can help me out, I think that's outlined in their waiver application. Is that correct, guys? Of whether you are on during that period or have, you know, some asynchronous learning during that period.
I believe so.
Okay.
It is.
Okay. All right. So kind of that should be, you know, outlined in your waiver application. I think, let me get right back down here to the bottom. I think we've got all caught up. I think we're good. Rhonda, you want to throw it back to you and move on to the next section?
Okay. Thank you, Jesse. I appreciate it. All right. So the next slide, please. All right, so in the second half of our meeting, we're going to be talking about the attendance waiver a little bit further, changes in healthy schools, the 2021-22 NTI, which we just briefly talked about, calendar submissions, and summer school calendars. So the attendance waiver is necessary, and this is a couple of people have asked me this, so I wanted to point it out. For districts that want to offer full-time virtual for their students, it allows the districts to offer this to take daily attendance for those students that are K through 4, and then for students that are grades 5 through 12, you can set up your schedule in that traditional virtual-based, performance-based courses as you have done in the past, and then receive credit once they've passed the course, or you can utilize the waiver and put it in place to track attendance for those full-time virtual students. So you definitely have to have it for the K through 4, and then 5 through 12, it's necessary only if you want to track attendance. This is a 1-year targeted waiver, and we'd like all the applications really by tomorrow. They're supposed to be board approved, and many districts don't have a board meeting until May. So what we're asking is to go ahead, fill out the waiver, call it conditional, send it in, and then once you have everything approved by your board, then you can send in a final waiver. This allows KDE the opportunity to know the intentions of what your district is planning. A couple of other things to point out: if you are using this virtual for the elementary students, you have to take attendance twice to get that full day attendance count. And if your district finds that a student is doing their work and you have the ability for them to come back in person, they can't go back and forth as Jesse had said. You can't be in person and then taken out for virtual and then put back in. So it's a one path or the other. And also, if you could see the last bullet point, if you're you can't just throw them in this for disciplinary reasons. And then if you find that the student's not doing their work, then you can take actions to return them back to in-person learning. And we have the link for the 1-year targeted waiver. So you can click on the link and you'll find the waiver, and also how to send that waiver in through our system.
Hey, Rhonda, can I jump in here real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Because we keep getting this question a lot, and it's dealing with the submission of the waiver. So I thought we'd go ahead and do it right now while you're talking about it. We're having people saying when they're trying to submit the waiver, they're getting some type of message that says you can't respond to this waiver. It's not uploading, data loss prevention. That's something on your side. Reach out to your IT staff. I don't know if you have a pop-up blocker or something on. I think that's coming from internally in your system. But if you still can't get it to work, I think I would reach out to Ben Maynard, who should have his contact information on that page. And I'm sure he will, if you can't get it to work, he'll let you email it straight to him.
I know with SAR, if you just change the browser, sometimes that will help. So it may be some kind of glitch.
Right. So yeah, so those are the two things I'd probably try first. It's a good suggestion, Rhonda. Change your browser and try it again, or just reach out to your IT staff.
All right. Okay, next slide, please. And in this slide, you'll see the link for the web page where you can find the waiver, and it's got the submission process. And then I kind of put that in red because we've gotten so many people asking about that, really concerned about that April 30th date. We want to know what your plan is if possible. So if you can get those conditional waivers in, we know they're not going to be board approved in some cases. And then again, just send in that final version once you have everything approved. Okay, thank you. All right, Healthy at School. And I don't know if Angie has made it on yet. She had another DPH meeting. One thing that she did stress to me is that the governor has just changed and made an executive order that if you're outside, you can take off your mask, whether you're vaccinated or not, if you're in a crowd of less than 1,000 people. So that's kind of the latest change. You can go to the Healthy at School guidance link that we've gotten, it's provided, and that will give you all of the latest information. And also note that seating reduction between the 6 feet and 3 feet, that's changed. So I was hoping that Angie would be able to take questions. She might be on towards the end of our meeting, but that was Oh, there you are. Okay,
I just popped on. Yep.
So if we have any questions, Angie, hopefully at the end you can address them. So
sure.
Okay. All right. Next slide, please. All right, NTI. As stated by Wendy, NTI, everything's going back to the original intention. So they can only be for weather, health, or safety, and you're only allowed 10 NTI days. Someone had asked about checking that box so you get the 420 minutes. We're not doing that any longer. That was just for the previous year. It's
Rhonda, sorry.
Yes.
It's Wendy. Can I interrupt real quick?
Yes.
The reasons within the regulation are only for health and safety. Weather is not within the regulation, so weather kind of falls under safety. That's the only correction I had for that.
Oh, okay, because we'll have to change that on our page because we've always had it for those like 3 separate. So, okay, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. So I am right, though, I think, in saying about that 420-minute checkbox, we're not going to have that, correct, Wendy?
Hey, it's Josh. Yes, that is correct. We're not doing the 420.
All right, and we have the guidance, and Steve Kissinger is the point of contact for that information as well. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, school calendars. The amended is open now, and the original calendars will be open May 15th. So if you're going to use a variable instruction calendar, it has to start on or after August 23rd for the coming school year. And also remember that you don't have to meet the 170 days, but you still are required the 1,062 hours of instruction for the variable instructional calendar. And then, of course, your traditional calendars begin after July 1st, and you would have to meet both the 170 and the 1,062 hours of instruction. And Josh has provided a link for information, and it's on this page as well. Summer school calendars, we've had a lot of questions. It's not mandatory that you use the summer school calendar in Infinite Campus, but we are thinking that we're going to be getting a lot of questions about enrollment and grade levels and so forth. So if you use Infinite Campus, then we can pull that information, and it would just make it easier for you for tracking. So, and it's really just that enrollment. You don't have to, it's really not that difficult. And Josh has gotten a snapshot and how to set it up. Okay. And that is all that I have for what we called housekeeping. And I can take some questions now. I think we had some come in on the Google Forms. So Josh and Jesse, if you see any that we haven't covered.
I think Laura's going to start.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you, Laura.
No problem. We have a couple NTI, so I'll start with that. On the calendar submission, it says override NTI instructional minutes. Can you address how this should be marked?
Okay, and that's what I was mentioning earlier. So we're not going to have that checkbox, so don't even, it won't be used for the school year. So you'll get the instructional minutes for the amount of time you have in your regular day for the NTI. You won't get that full 420 minutes as you did in the past.
Is it correct that for the 21-22, all students in the district must be doing remote learning to use an NTI day? For example, if one school has to shut down and goes to a remote learning day that day, it would not be an NTI day?
Correct. So just as we've had in the past, so if let's say one school has a pipe burst and those kids can't go to school, then that would be the case where you would put an emergency waiver for that day for that school. So you can't have NTI just for one school. It has to be the entire, it has to be all schools. So you have to just kind of put your mindset back into the way it was set up prior to COVID, and it's going to be the same way.
Based upon the CASIS end-of-year training, it seems as though it is being recommended to track summer school NIC. Is this necessary, and will there be any additional guidance provided?
I believe Josh has everything as far as the guidance. It's right on our KDE website. If you search for school calendars, all of the information is right there on his page, and you can click on the guidance. Again, it's not necessary as far as being mandated by us that you have to do it. We really just put it in place for your benefit to help you, so you don't have to worry when we're going to be asking you how many kids did you have and what grades were they in. We're not even sure what the questions will be that come in, but we're sure that we're going to have to report out how it went over the summer. And so that's why we put it in place.
Is the documentation regarding using blended learning groups for all virtual students for the 21-22 school year a way to track students without building separate calendars to enroll them into? Or do you still need to build the separate virtual calendar and also assign them to a virtual blended learning group?
Okay, so the blended learning groups, you can put it all in one calendar and identify, you just have to identify those kids as the virtual. So you don't have to have a separate calendar. You just want to make sure that you identify those kids. And Josh, if you have anything to add to that, that's as much as I can say on that question.
The only thing that I will add to that is Rhonda had sent out information on how to build that information up. I think that went out last week.
Mm-hmm.
So it talks about how to enter your students into the blended learning groups that's going to be virtual for the 21-22 school year.
And the person that asked that question, feel free to reach out to Josh and myself, and we can always help you further with that detail.
Okay. If students enrolled in the virtual program for the 21-22 and districts are required to use no virtual attendance that writes back with the IC posting tool, and the student does not attend for the whole day, would the attendance staff make that no virtual attendance for the whole day, or would the students be checked in and out in the traditional way?
I'm going to have to also revert over to Josh. From what I understand, that no virtual attendance, it's just the way it is now. If you had an in-person kid, so the kid doesn't come to school, you have no virtual attendance, and then they provide a doctor's note that they were sick, then the attendance clerk can go in and put that note in that they're excused. So if they're unexcused, then they could override that. I think that's the question that you're asking. I don't know, Josh, is there more that you would say about that?
So if it's middle school through high school, that the attendance is going to be taken every period just as normal. And then if the teacher marks the student absent, it's automatically going to post to the attendance tab. And then when the sync runs at night, it's going to create that the new code that we're going to send out to everyone. And then that's
that new code's for next year. We don't have that built yet, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And then it'll be the same way for your kindergarten through 5th grade. You'll have one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And then so if the student didn't participate in the afternoon, it would get the half day.
And that's that NVA code?
Yes, and this is Jessie. I am going to jump in and say, but it still will work just like your in-person kiddos. Like Rhonda said, if they send you a doctor's note, because even if they're virtual, kids still go to the doctor. If, they were absent because they had a doctor's note, your attendance clerk can still go in and add that doctor's note up to the 2 or 3 days or however long you have afterwards, just like your normal kid to take off. It's just like your in-person kid would have had, we don't know where you are, you have a unexcused absence. Well, now the attendance clerk, I have this doctor's note, I can go in and put it in to take out that NVA attendance.
Yes.
Okay.
If we track all virtual students in the district at one school, would the district create a virtual schedule structure at that one school and then create a separate middle, high, and elementary school calendar due to different start and end times based on the level?
And I'm also going to revert over to Josh. From what I understand, you can track attendance at one school. You can do this and track attendance, but make sure that you're meeting those minimum requirements for the instructional minutes and days. Josh, is that anything else that you'd want to add to that?
I'm gonna let Jessie, because my cut in and out, so I didn't hear the whole question.
Okay, I'll jump in on that one. That's kind of very involved, and we may reach out to this person. That's an option, and a lot of this, is kind of your setup preferences. If you have everybody that you're tracking all of your virtual kids out of one, school, and that's where you keep your virtual students, you don't necessarily have to set up an elementary, middle, and high within that one separate calendars for them and have them abide by the elementary, middle, and high school actual, schedule structure. As long as their schedule structure meets the minimum requirements of days and hours, It's just like, having another school. So you don't have to divide that out. But I'd also say that you don't even necessarily have to put them all under one school. Where you use the blended learning, you could let your elementary virtual kiddos reside at a blended learning group within the calendar in their elementary school, so it would follow the same schedule structure. So if you kind of want to talk about pros and cons on that, shoot us an email to Josh or myself, and we'll go through that with you, because there are some pros and cons.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Will there be a template non-resident agreement policies districts can use to get ready for House Bill 563?
I saw Matt on here. I don't know if I can throw that question to him.
Chuck didn't leave. Let's let Chuck do it.
Mr. Truesdell.
I was going to say, we at this time do not have a plan for a template non-resident pupil policy. My understanding is that the Kentucky School Board Association usually works with school districts in terms of maybe developing a boilerplate reciprocal agreement. So they may be the better place to do that, but we will certainly discuss that internally now that we've been asked that question.
That's what I was going to say, Chuck. I imagine that they'll roll that out next year as part of their policy updates.
Makes sense to me, yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you both.
Do we need to have non-resident contracts information board approved and sent to other districts for 22-23 in case House Bill 563 is wiped out by the lawsuit?
I think Mr. Truesdell really addressed that already for Safeguard to have that in place. Is that correct, Chuck?
That is correct. Just sort of to be on the safe side. And again, I will say, I've heard rumors of a lawsuit. I can't guarantee you there will be a lawsuit. But just to be on the safe side, I probably would go ahead and draft those reciprocal agreements contingent on 563 not taking effect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does the 5-year senior affect the dropout rate? What about if they say they're done after their fall sport?
So the graduated seniors who graduate this year, will not affect your graduation rate because they will have graduated in 4 years. However, students who take advantage of this program, who then take 5 years to graduate. So this would only affect current high school students, obviously, because it's sort of like with athletic eligibility, that clock doesn't start ticking until they enter their freshman year of high school. So if they take 5 years then to graduate with this program, that would be, and that is a federal requirement on accountability standards. So that would affect your graduation rate for those purposes. Now, if they manage to graduate in 4 years, even with taking advantage of this program, they would still be counted as seniors graduating in 4 years. But and we've gotten this other question too, that would not count as early graduation for the purposes of that seat bonus, as it were.
Thank you. Will the NTI waiver be in GMAP?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Will the NTI waiver be in GMAP?
I don't know.
Wendy might.
This is Wendy. There's not plans for that as of yet.
Thank you. Where is the newest? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was going to go ahead and answer a question that we got earlier that I did get an answer for. The question was, could you get elective credit for repeating a course in the supplemental school year program? And they confirmed what I was thinking, which is that if you repeat the same course, you do not get 2 different credits towards graduation. Now, if you take a supplemental course or something of that nature with a different course code, yes, you can count both of those toward graduation. But let's say you take Algebra 2 and get a low grade, and then you take it again and get a higher grade, you can only count that once for graduation. You do not get to count that as both a math credit and an elective credit. You only get the count once. Sorry for butting in.
No, and you'll get the higher grade, correct? So if you had a
Yes.
C and then you made an A, then you would get an A if it's the same class that you've retaken.
For your GPA, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Where is the newest Healthy at School Guidance Rondo reference located?
You can search that. It's right on Angie's page on the KDE website, and also the link is provided in the PowerPoint, and I am going to send that out to everyone after this meeting, so you'll have the PowerPoint with all the links, so that it's right. And you can even just search health on the KDE site, and it'll come up.
And actually, I just spoke with Kelly Foster, and that the Healthy at School document is being updated currently with the new executive order, and it'll be on the webpage sometime next week. All superintendents did get an email from Dr. Glass that was approved by Dr. Stack at Public Health that went into specifics about that. And if there's questions, you can let me know.
Thank you, Angie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Jesse, that's all the questions on the Google Doc.
Okay, we'll jump back over because they have filled up your queue here, Rhonda. So
Oh,
settle
no.
in. No, get ready. Here it comes. Okay, if a student is virtual in 21-22 and they are not participating, can a district require them to return to in-person? And also, can the district offer an option to return to in-person for the second semester?
I don't see why they couldn't, but Jesse, do you see a reason why they couldn't?
I believe these are all things, and I may lean on Matt here to jump in. I believe these are all things that they can outline in their waiver. Is that correct, Matt? Kind of their plans for these kind of scenarios?
Yeah, I think they have to lay out, the sort of what happens if a child isn't in attendance and virtually in attendance, and then what's the recourse. And I think that it also contemplates that truancy laws won't be enforced against those children. So yeah, I think that you need to lay out a plan for returning those kids to in-person instruction if necessary. Yeah,
and that plan may not, I'm sorry, that plan may not necessarily be the same from district to district, so we won't have like a blanket answer.
That's correct.
Correct.
So it'll really be the policy that they put in place and decide as a district.
Yes.
That's right.
Thank you.
Okay. This says we filled out and submitted our virtual waiver. How do we know it was received, and when will we know if it's been approved? And I actually reached out to Ben on this one, Rhonda, because he's manning those, and he says when you submit it, the form through Google Forms, it should kick back an email confirmation that you can keep. It may go to your junk mail, so try looking for it there. If you can't find any confirmation that you got it, send an email to Ben Maynard, and he can verify to say if they have it or not. He said he's more than happy to double check that if you need to. And he says after the board meeting where all of these are approved, they are going to notify everyone that their plan has been approved. If it's approved, most likely through email. So there's your two paths for that.
And his contact information was on the PowerPoint as well. They can just click on that to get it, to reach him.
Okay, good deal. All right. Okay, why can students not go back and forth from virtual to in-person or vice versa? What if one route is taken, but it turns out not to be successful for the student?
Well, I think that almost goes back to that question that Matt just answered, as far as if you have a child on virtual, full virtual, they're not performing and attending, then you have that policy in place as far as what or how to put them back in person and the criteria involved. We can't be jumping back and forth. We're just not set up to do that for the coming school year in our system. And so it's just one path or the other, and that's the way we've got it designed.
Okay, and so the next question kind of contemplates the whatever the student is on day one is what they have to remain. And I think you just explained not necessarily you have an option to get out of that, not get out of it, but transition them back to in-person in their waiver. But it's not something like you said that should be hopped back and forth.
Right.
Okay, if we submit a waiver but decide not to use the plan, what should be done?
You're fine. I mean, actually, it's a smart idea to submit your waiver. This way, if we do have some pandemic or you've already got it in place, if you decide not to use it, you don't have to. So it's really just an intention of the waiver. If you're going to be using the waiver, you feel like you're going to be needing the waiver and your policy and procedures and how that would work. And then if there's a need, you don't want to use it, then you don't have to.
Okay. Giving Josh a heads up, this is virtual performance-based course setup question. What if your virtual program is all set up through virtual and performance-based courses? They don't have to participate during the traditional school day, correct?
That is correct. If you are doing what we're now calling the traditional virtual performance-based, they do not have to be in the seat because you're going to receive your full funding at the end of the school year if the student passes the course.
Right.
So that's another kind of place where they pick one path or another, right, Josh?
That is correct.
But okay, but it is possible to have some students who've picked a fully virtual path and have tracked the attendance through blended learning groups, and then still have some students using these performance-based courses for dual credit and other setups like that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Next year, if a student is in person and must be quarantined for 10 days, not sick themselves, so they think that won't qualify for home hospital, will they have excused absences, or will there be a quarantined exempt code that won't hurt our ADA?
We don't have a quarantined exempt code in place. So if you have a student that is going to be quarantined, I guess a doctor's note would be the best way to proceed, and then they can make up their work just as they would if they were, sick with the flu and they were out for 10 days. So we don't have, the only way you could go on home hospital is if you had that paperwork signed by a physician that you need to be placed on home hospital. Jesse, unless there's something that I'm not aware of, that's pretty much what we're looking at for the next year.
I was just going to drag Matt into this question and ask, Matt, is there something in that home hospital statute that kind of alludes to being required to be at home for like a quarantine, even though they're not positive if somebody has quarantined them? Is that, or do we need to look into that further before we answer that?
I think we need to go back and look at that. We removed some of that stuff was removed about public health in the last time that statute was amended in 2020. So we'll look into that and get back with them.
Okay, hold on that one. We'll put something out on that just to verify what those kids who actually aren't sick but have been quarantined, what happens with those.
Yeah, we've had a lot of those questions come.
Okay, let's see. We may have done this, sorry. On the KDE website, the most recent Healthy at Schools document is dated March 31st. When will the new document be posted to reflect the governor's most recent mask recommendations?
And I think Angie just answered that question. They're actually doing it right now.
Okay, sorry, I was doing too many things.
Oh, no, you're fine. We had, they were having their DPH meeting the same time this meeting was being held. So that's why Angie kind of had to bounce from one to the next. And that's what they're working on as we speak. And that will be, I'm sure if you click on the link, once that's updated, the link that's on our PowerPoint, it should take you to that guidance.
All right, somebody's asked where you find and submit the K4 waiver. I believe that's in your presentation, right, Rhonda?
Yes, we've got the link. And if you click on it, there's the waiver, and then there's the submission process. It's all on the page. So it's just right below it, and you'll see it if you click on it. And again, I'll get this out to you guys as soon as the meeting's over.
And I also think a little trick, if you just go to the KDE website and type virtual school in the search bar, it'll take you to Ben Maynard's virtual school webpage, and that's where it is as well. Okay, when would you recommend we switch from our active calendar to the summer school calendar? It's maybe a Josh question.
So you don't, so let me really think about this. You can only switch to the summer school calendar as soon as your last day is over of the traditional calendar. You can only have one active calendar going at a time.
So pretty much any time after the other calendar, the regular calendar ends, they can choose to switch over?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Stay on, Josh, because there's more calendar questions. For the summer school calendar, if credit is earned July 21st, can we create the calendar in 21-22 instead of 20-21?
It would be the 2021, wouldn't it, Josh?
So that is up to the district on how they want to handle that. Jesse and I did some testing on that, and if you have it in the 2021, it will post to the 2021 school year, even though it's in July. It really depends on how you want your transcript to look on that end.
Right. It's where do you want that to post?
Yes,
So
that credit to be posted at.
if for a while we thought that summer school classes couldn't run across from fiscal year from June into July, and it will work. So if if it's in your 2021 calendar, that's where it'll post to on your transcript, is on 2021 school year. But if you put it in the 21-22, it'll go to the next school year. So wherever you want to put it. Okay. I think the answer to this is yes. Is the portal now open to submit 21-22 calendar reports? Oh, yes, no, that's next year. 21-22 calendar reports. That would be a new.
That's the original 21-22. So yes, that is open.
Okay. For summer school, what start status do we use for student enrollments within that calendar?
So the start status is going to be just as normal as a normal school year for summer school. So that's going to be a EO1. And then when summer school is over, you're going to use the CO1.
And I think we've dealt with this. Are districts required by KAR or KRS to complete a summer school calendar, or is it just that is just that, got tongue tied. Is that just a recommendation?
Just a recommendation.
All right. In status of CO1 for current. Do we need to put an in status of CO1 for current enrollments prior to enrollments in summer school?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. If your district chooses not to create a summer school calendar, are there other steps that need to be taken in IC?
You don't have to. It's really up to the district. The reason that we are expecting to have to provide information on what districts did over the summer with their summer school. And so that is why we have put it in place, really just so that we can pull data and send it over instead of asking you to have to do it.
I would jump in and go ahead and encourage you to do all normal end of the year steps that are taken in IC. I know there's not a SAR report this year, but there are lots of reports through that process that help you clean up overlaps, enrollments, all kinds of things. You'll still want to do all of that stuff because the data in Infinite Campus will still be pulled for federal reporting, school report card, other things. So anything you normally do at the end of the year, you'll want to do it.
And Brad did an end of year presentation, and that's on the website as well, where he goes into detail about the reports and making sure all of your end of year things are complete. So you can go and look that up as well if you want to see the PowerPoint presentation from Brad.
Okay. Will we be receiving guidance on how to identify students taking advantage of Senate Bill 128? Chuck, I believe that's coming out of Office of Teaching and Learning. Am I correct, or is that a different office?
Yeah, sorry, can you reread the question?
Yes. Will
Sorry.
we be receiving guidance on how to identify students taking advantage of Senate Bill 128?
Yes, that will be coming down the pike shortly when we do the Infinite Campus, when we tell you how to flag those students, how to identify those students. That is coming. But I'm not sure that's going to be housed in OTL.
Sorry, I said the wrong thing.
But you may be right, but I'm not sure exactly where that's. I don't know that decision has been made yet.
Okay.
But we will be letting you know.
All right. Got a couple of healthy at school questions here, Angie. Asking if there's any updates to the number of days paper materials must sit before they can be handled, or any updated information on requirements for additional cleaning.
As far as handling paper and supplies, all the research is showing that it's not living long term on surfaces now. It's more of an airborne thing. So therefore, you do not need to let paper rest a certain amount of time. As long as you're using good hand hygiene, frequent hand washing, using hand sanitizer, etc. So, to wait to reshelve books or grade papers, you don't have to do that anymore. And what was the second question? I'm sorry.
That's okay. Any updated information on requirements for additional cleaning, or they changed any of that?
None of that has changed at this point. So, I think we're kind of like, let's just keep doing what we're doing until the school year's out, and then we'll reevaluate for the fall.
Okay. A calendar question, Josh. Do we uncheck the attendance box when using an NTI day for the 21-22 school year?
As of right now, yes, we're going to go back to before the pandemic hit. So yes, that will be taken. You will not check the attendance box.
Okay. All right. Are all virtual students required to be synchronous learning? I think that's another thing that's outlined in your waiver, how you're going to handle that, because I think there's a little bit of wiggle room on that's outlined in the waiver. How are we handling students who are quarantined / positive with COVID? Do they have the ability to participate virtually for the short term?
At this time, we don't have that in place. And I think that's one thing that Matt was going to give us some further guidance on. But right now, no. And they could do some type of home hospital if they're positive and the physician signs the paperwork.
Correct. All right. Okay, this question says, will the waiver allow the districts to track regular attendance in one school? And there's not a name on this, but I think we may need a little bit more information on that unless somebody else knows exactly what they're talking about.
And you can email us that question, and we can reach out to you individually as well.
Okay, may need some help from Matt on this one. Will the non-virtual attendance for the virtual students post at night? The answer to that is yes. And the follow-up question is there a reason why the teacher can't just take quote unquote normal attendance for the virtual K through 5 students? I think, Matt, that went back to the whole issue that attendance in all of our regs looks that is in person. Is that correct?
Well, no, I mean, the waiver is sort of waiving that in-person requirement. That's what it's doing.
Right. That's why you have to have the waiver. That's why you can't just take normal attendance for K through 5.
That's right.
And we've asked for the attendance to be taken twice throughout the day for those younger students so that you get the full attendance credit for the day.
Okay. Have several people still asking about this quarantine next year, but if they're not actually sick, and do they just have to take them as absent? We're working on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Our district plans to offer 5 through 12 performance-based learning option within our high school and middle schools. No K through 4 virtual.
Okay.
Would we need to set up a separate virtual calendar structure within our high school and middle school, or will we just use the blended learning groups just like this year?
would that be, they want to use the waiver where they're tracking attendance for those students, or are they doing a traditional virtual performance-based courses?
That's good to point out, Rhonda. I think because they're talking about blended learning groups, I would think they're taking attendance, which means if you're taking virtual attendance, yes, you'll have to use blended learning groups. Yes, you'll have to fill out the waiver for high school and middle schools. If you're not doing the waiver for those 5 through 12 students and they're through, normal, what we call standard old school traditional performance-based course setup, you don't have to have a separate schedule structure and you don't have to have a blended learning group on them.
And you just set them up as you have in the past.
Correct.
So, and Josh also has guidance for that as well, for that what we call traditional virtual performance-based courses. So you can look at that as well if you have any questions on how to set that up.
Okay. Chuck, House Bill 563 is back. So did you say that we need to count on the fact that House Bill 563 will not go into effect?
I wouldn't count on that.
Okay.
No.
I'm starting to regret even saying that there may be a lawsuit on that. I'm just trying to keep everybody aware of sort of current events. It keeps going back to the question, should we have reciprocal agreements in place for the 22-23 school year just in case? And again, I would say that's probably not a bad idea to do that contingent on, if the law takes effect, then the contract isn't empowered. But if the law does not take effect, then you need to have reciprocal agreements in place.
Okay, you can hang on for a second because we're back to some supplemental school year questions here.
Sure.
Just to be clear, the higher grade can only be placed on a student who has not graduated. That's correct? All right. Graduated senior transcripts cannot be changed by a high school grade. Okay, good. Right. I didn't think a student could earn additional credits in the supplemental school year.
Again, that is if they take supplemental courses. They can earn credits for those because those would have different course codes, but they just can't earn additional credit. And again, they could earn credit for courses they failed the first year and then took a second time and then passed. You can get credit for those, obviously, but if they just can't get double credit for the same course code.
Okay, Wendy, I have an A5 question here. It says we added A1 and A5 on our pupil attendance waiver at the time of submission so we could have time to weigh our options. I just need to confirm that this will not affect our current A5 program that operates under a performance-based attendance model. We do not want to make changes to our current A5 school. Is there anything they need to do with you guys for that, or do they just need to reach out to you and ask that question?
I would have them reach out to me directly to ask that question. Nothing for the waiver will affect current year, obviously, but we do want to make sure that we have it set up correctly for next year. So I would have some additional questions. So if they could reach out to me by email, that would be great.
Okay. Let's see here. All right. This is a kind of involved question about more grades on the supplemental school year. So I think we'll probably maybe reach out to this person to see if students have not graduated and returned for supplemental school year. Higher grade will be counted on the transcript and in the GPA, but I'm assuming that guidance counselor would need to manually update the transcript to delete the old course. Josh, that may come to you since that's kind of an NIC question. Is that how you'd get that old course off the transcript?
That will be one that we're going to have to test and really look at because I'm not sure, and we'll probably pull in Kim on that as well.
Okay, all right. That came in from an anonymous. If you could, I don't know, submit it back with your name so that we can reach out to you. We'll put you in contact with kind of our transcript gurus to make sure we know how to get that old course off of there. Okay, let's see. Will you discuss taking attendance for elementary students that select virtual? I know we are required to take attendance twice daily for elementary, But as an example, if a student has logged on at 8 and the teacher marks the child as present, then at 9 the student is off camera, offline. How do we record it in Infinite Campus? Is that something that's also outlined in those waivers, Matt? Their policies for such situations?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. And I do know that we have districts that made different calls on that this past year for participation. And this isn't participation, this is attendance, but I think that would be outlined in your waiver as well.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's going to be a district decision on how you handle that, right?
Right. All right. So Matt, this one kind of comes back to you also. Is there anything in KRS or KAR that states districts cannot allow a student to go between virtual and in person, or is that a suggestion because of IC setup? A district does not get ADA funding for excused absences. Quarantine students will have a significant impact on a district's ADA. I believe that's because they're selecting that waiver and picking a path. Is that correct, Matt?
Right. So, I mean, without the waiver, a kid cannot attend virtually, right? Unless it's performance based. You have to take in-person attendance. So if you take the waiver, what's being waived is that in-person attendance requirement, so that you take attendance on them as, virtually. So that's what's being waived by the waiver. Now the going back and forth and the mechanics of that is largely, hemmed in by our system requirements, I think, too. But yeah, the waiver is what prohibits you from going back and forth, because part of that waiver too, you're also saying how you're going to set up your program, and as part of getting the waiver, you have to lay out all your plan, which includes, that you can't go back and forth, really, right?
Okay, and we are continuing to look into those quarantine students who aren't necessarily sick or positive to see what we need to be able to do for them. Okay, Angie, this may draw you back in. Since the number of COVID cases are decreasing, when can districts return the responsibility of contact tracing back to public health officials? Has anything been discussed about that yet?
That was briefly discussed today, and we were just told that things I think are going to stay the same regarding contact tracing through the end of this school year, and they'll reevaluate possibly for summer and fall.
Okay. And I just noticed we are over time, but let me see here. Josh, if the summer school calendar is exempt, do we really need to make it the active calendar?
If districts are going to be taking attendance and entering course data in there, yes, it would have to be active for it to fall back on the correct school year.
Okay. Hey, Rhonda, I want to note everybody's time here. Do you, we are over 11:30. Do you want to try and answer these through the Q&A and send those out to everybody, or you want to try and roll through for a couple more?
I think we can roll through if that's acceptable.
Okay. All right. I'm fine with that.
How many more do we have? If you need to leave the meeting, you can. And then if we don't know the answer, we'll get the question to the appropriate person.
Right. We have 7 more questions. So if anybody at KDE needs to hop off, go ahead and we'll circle back and get it to them. But I'm just going to roll on if you're okay, Rhonda.
Yes.
Okay. All right. If we've end dated before summer school, how do we change grades earned during summer school for the 2021 year?
Can you say that again? Because you can't have both calendars. You'd have to put the grades in for the one and then start the summer school. Am I misunderstanding?
No, I think that's right. Josh, do you know where they're going with this one?
So I think that person needs to reach out to me, because there is a way you can do that through the transcript. You can edit it, or you can go into the grade book and edit it and then repost. Just have that district to reach out to me, and I can help them with that.
Okay.
Okay. All right. If a district's plan is to determine if a student is synchronous or asynchronous in the virtual setting, how do you recommend a school take attendance twice a day for an asynchronous model?
And that's up to the district how they want to proceed and put that in their policy for their waiver. That's really not anything that we can tell them. Am I correct on that, Josh? Is there a recommendation that you have?
I think you're right, Rhonda. That's going to be set up in their waiver to describe their synchronous or asynchronous models
Yeah.
and what they're doing, and that's
Yeah.
okay. If we have the waiver and have created 2 attendance meetings virtually, I think that means 2 courses. Could the teacher just post normal attendance so the attendance clerk can verify it? I don't understand the reason for the different setup. And I'll weigh in on this. Because you're asking for that waiver, we have to have a way in the system to note that those students are not in your building. If you just marked regular attendance, if something was to happen, that regular attendance looks like those students are sitting in your building. So blended learning groups marking this virtual attendance will make sure that it can be determined who's in your building and who is not. Okay. We plan to submit a waiver for virtual K through 5, but do traditional performance-based for virtual 6 through 12. To confirm, do our virtual K through 4 students have to follow a typical day schedule of 8 to 3 with attendance tracked twice daily?
Yes. Correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
they will track whatever they will follow whatever your typical day is in your elementary school. Okay. Do we need to keep the end of year student participation report on file at the district and school level? Josh, I think that's what we're recommending since they can't keep some of their other reports. Is that right?
Yes, that is. So what you'll do, you're just going to print off the aggregate and the detail report and just keep that in with your school months that you do in the past.
Okay. I believe Wendy may have dropped off. Somebody's
Yes, she did.
asking if A5 school, they have an A5 school that's been inactive for several years and they want to talk about reactivation. I would encourage you to reach out to Wendy first to talk about that. And then you can, if you can process that through maybe the DASR system, but I would touch base with her on that first. Let's see. You mentioned only one calendar can be open at a time. Can we close the 21-22 and make the summer school calendar active before we close out the 21-22 regular school year and submit reports?
I want to say no, unless Josh knows something different. You'd have to keep it until you finish.
See, they're talking about 21-22, so they're talking about next school year. They may need to reach out to you, Josh, and see what they're trying to do.
Yeah, they need to reach out to me on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. Angie, still on? Yes. Okay. Has there been any information on when we'll be able to stop entering COVID data at the state level through COG on a daily basis? KOG?
No, there's been no changes in that.
Okay. All right. Rhonda, I think we made it through. That's it. That's all of the questions I have, unless anything has popped back on to the Google form. Laura, is it okay over there?
Yes, we don't have anything on there.
And again, if you guys have any further questions or you need a little bit more detailed information, please just reach out to us. We have our contact information on the PowerPoint, and most of you know my cell number, so feel free to call us and send us an email, whatever. We will definitely reach back out and get the right answer for you. We appreciate your time today, and we want to thank Chuck Truesdale for his time and speaking with us. We really appreciate that. A lot of the DPPs were asking for that, so we want to tell you thank you very much for your time. And again, if you need anything, just reach out. And when we get some clarification on the home hospital questions, we will also put that out. This recording will be put on our website. We'll send you the link along with the PowerPoint. And we appreciate it. Thank you all very much for joining us today.